Hello everyone and welcome back to another video with On Point Politics, and today this is a little bit more of a fun type of video, but we're going to be previewing the 2028 presidential election, seeing what the battleground map essentially would be and who may possibly run next cycle. Make sure to go ahead and hit the like button and to subscribe if you want more content just like this. And so, looking at the map, obviously the safe Republican states would still be Idaho, Utah, Wyoming, Montana, the Dakotas, as well as all of Nebraska, except that 2nd Congressional District. Kansas will probably not be in the safe column. Oklahoma will be, Arkansas, Louisiana, Missouri, also Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana, West Virginia, and Mississippi will be in the safe Republican column, as well as roughly, give or take, you could say maybe South Carolina and Iowa would be in the safe Republican column. By this point, they'd probably be voting very far to the right of the nation by that point. But you could even argue South Carolina may not even be safe. Maybe Iowa is sort of still in the safe Republican column. For the Democrats, I do think that California, Oregon, and Washington will all be safe. I think Colorado will be. Illinois will also be. A lot of the northeastern states will probably be in the safe Democrat column. Again, guys, Donald Trump is an anomaly figure. He's an anomaly in terms of appealing to a broader electorate. The reason why this is completely different from what I'm suggesting is going to be the 2024 map where Trump wins easily is because we can't necessarily predict the political environment. And second of all, it's actually going to be quite difficult for us to gauge, who exactly the two nominees are. And so this is sort of a generic battleground map per se. Now, you notice that Maine's first is in the safe column, but Hawaii isn't going to be in the safe Democrat column, and I will get to that in a second. And Hawaii may play a pretty interesting part in the 2028 election. Looking at the likely Republican states, Kansas, Ohio, South Carolina, Texas, and Florida will more than likely be in this column, including Maine's 2nd Congressional District, as well as Alaska, albeit it probably will be under 10 points in the 2028 election. I expect the state of Alaska to be a little bit more competitive going into the future for Republicans or for Democrats. However, I actually think that North Carolina will be in the likely Republican column. The state's been sort of stagnant, but I do expect a little bit of a rightward trend. The state GOP has gotten pretty competent in the state of North Carolina to the point where I actually think by 2028, we may not even have a competitive race in the state of North Carolina and may be at least over a 5-point victory, even in a competitive environment in the presidential level. Texas and Florida will be basically around 10-point wins. Ohio about a 12 to 13-point victory, even in a neutral environment for either party. You'll notice that Colorado is in the safe Democrat column. I do expect it to be over a 15-point victory by the time we get to the 2028 presidential election. New Mexico, however, is going to range between the 5 to 10 point range. Hispanic voters are going to move to the right quite a bit, and I think that the Republicans will keep some long-term games with them. And so you will probably see a 5 to 10 point win in the state of New Mexico for the Democrat nominee heading into that cycle. We also see the state of Hawaii, I think, is going to be about a 10 to 15 point win. This state's actually been the state that's been trending to the right the fastest out of any single state. And that's mainly because Republicans have been gaining with Asian voters here, like little by little by little. And Hawaii, especially after the Maui fires, is definitely going to take a hard turn to the right. I think I have it shifting almost like 15 points to the right this cycle from the 2020 election. And so I think it is going to trend to the right in 2028. And you'll probably see it be under about a 15-point win. At some point, if trends continue, you could see Alaska and Hawaii actually swap places. That would be kind of funny. And that would actually net Republicans in electoral votes. So that would be kind of hilarious if that happened. Now, these are the more traditional battleground states for the cycle. Now, I do think that more than likely, in this environment, Nebraska 2nd would probably be gone for Republicans. The polling data doesn't look good for Trump right now. However, I do expect it to be a way tighter race. But without Trump on the ballot, I do expect Republicans to struggle. In Nebraska second, it'll probably be over a 5-point victory for the Democrat regardless. I would say the same for Virginia as well. I think that's going to be there, as well as New Hampshire and Maine at large. I think those are going to be in the likely column without Trump on the ballot. And then you'll have the traditional swing states, which won't even include North Carolina. And I think Minnesota will be pushed into a somewhat leaning category for the Democrats, which I do think it would lean for the Democrat. I think it would be about a 3 to 4 point victory for the Democrat in that race. Now, we are going to add a new lean Democrat state. That would be the state of Arizona. Now, I think the state of Arizona is interesting. I think that Donald Trump will help Republicans keep some long-term gains there with Hispanics, but I think the college-educated whites will probably shift left enough to essentially make the state about a 1 to 2 point win for the Democrat in 2028. However, with African-American voters in Atlanta and some non-college whites, I think Georgia will probably actually remain in a lean Republican category going into that election. And I also think that more than likely the state of Nevada will even lean Democrat, because both of these states are essentially voting with each other. And I believe that more than likely with these college-educated whites, I think the Republican in 2028 won't perform as well with them. And so I think that's where you're going to see that shift. Georgia's probably only going to be like a 1 to 2 point win as well for the Republican. I think Nevada and Arizona will probably be 1 to 2 point victories for the Democrat going into that election. Minnesota, the reason why the Rust Belt is still to the right of the Sun Belt in some cases is because Republicans have seen continued growth here. And so there is going to be a point in time where the Rust Belt will probably be voting to the right of the Sun Belt on average. And we'll probably see that develop as time goes on. I think Wisconsin and Pennsylvania will probably lean Republican in a generic matchup, depending on who the candidate is, just because of the fact that Republican registrations in Pennsylvania have gotten so much better in Pennsylvania that I think that a Republican in a generic environment would win by 1 to 2 points. I think Wisconsin is going to be like a 2 to 3 point win in a generic environment. They're losing ground in the driftless area, and the Democrats will probably do better in the wild counties, but I still think a 1 to 2 point win for a Republican will be on the table. And the only pure toss-up on the map is Michigan. You could even say maybe Nevada is even a pure toss-up in this case. Maybe it is tilt, because I think in 2028 it will vote to the right of Arizona. And so really the only two major toss-ups probably would be Michigan and Nevada. And just to be fair to the Democrat, more than likely Pennsylvania would also be categorized as a toss-up. Maybe even Georgia at that point could be categorized as a toss-up as well. So that kind of depends on the national environment, but essentially Nevada, Michigan, and Pennsylvania would kind of be those states that essentially decide the 2028 presidential election in a neutral environment. This is assuming that around a 2 to 3 point victory for the Democrat would happen. That would be considered, in my book, a neutral environment for a presidential election. Now, if you're looking at a tied popular vote, the Republican's going to be winning all the swing states, and a tied popular vote probably even wins Minnesota without even winning the popular vote, or even ties. If the Democrats are up by 5 nationally, that probably puts states like, Wisconsin and Georgia into the toss-up category. Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Nevada will be lean, and Minnesota will probably basically jump into the 5-point victory margin for the Democrats. So it really depends, but more than likely, I see Wisconsin and Georgia being pretty good states for Republicans going into the future. I just think that the college-educated whites in Maricopa County may be a problem for Republicans. Maybe Arizona is a toss-up, like it could technically be, in Michigan, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada kind of decide the election, but I have to probably put Arizona in the lean Democrat column for the presidential level, because I think when Trump is gone, you're probably going to see lower non-college educated turnout, and that's really going to affect a state like Arizona and potentially even Georgia in this case. However, I do think the Rust Belt's going to vote to the right of the Sun Belt in some places. So, I mean, you're still going to have your major, 7 swing states, but I do think that Arizona and Minnesota, as well as Wisconsin and Georgia, I would say as of right now, do lean Republican and Democrat in their own respective directions, and Michigan, Pennsylvania, Nevada would be those kind of toss-up states. I think if J.D. Vance is nominated after a Trump victory, we will be looking more at a D+1 tied, a popular vote electorate, which will be pretty hard for the Democrat to win, at that point, JD would probably be up in most of the Rust Belt states. He'd be up in Nevada, and Arizona would effectively be a toss-up, and Minnesota would probably be tilt Democrat at that point. Maybe Arizona would probably even be tilt Republican, and possibly even Georgia, South Carolina, Kansas, as well as, Colorado, Oregon, Illinois kind of falls in the likely Democrat category. Virginia would probably fall in the lean Democrat category, as well as in New Hampshire and Maine, including New Jersey. So probably if JD were to run, more than likely I could actually see this being the possible electorate. This would be sort of a preliminary, battleground map for the 2028 race, more than likely. This is kind of what I would be looking at in that sense. And so if, for example, they don't nominate JD and a more establishmentarian Republican gets nominated, I do think that at that point the Rust Belt would effectively be gone for the GOP at that point, as well as Maine at large in New Hampshire, including Nebraska second, including Virginia. I think that if they nominate an establishment GOP candidate, they probably wouldn't be able to win the Rust Belt regardless of who the nominee is at that point, and a lot of these deep blue states would kind of fall into place. Now, I do think that North Carolina may be lean in that sense. Probably Iowa and Ohio would probably be likely. Texas and Florida would probably still be likely, even with a establishment nominee, just because of how bad the Democrats are doing in those states. And Arizona, Nevada, and Georgia, like some of these Sunbelt states would be up for grabs. I don't think they'd be able to win Nevada. Arizona and Georgia could be up for grabs for an establishmentarian type of GOP nominee. But other than that, I think that's about it. I'd actually say that this would probably end up being the map. Like if you see a Ron DeSantis run in 2028, that like 270 map for the Democrats probably would actually happen if we go into the election with a neutral environment. If things were to change, maybe you'd see Wisconsin or Pennsylvania go to Ron DeSantis, but I think that somebody like Ron DeSantis or Nikki Haley or most GOP nominees would probably have a hard time in the Rust Belt. I would even say Vivek, as good as he is, would probably even struggle in a place like Michigan. I think he would more than likely do very well in Georgia. I think he'd do pretty good in North Carolina, in my opinion. I also think he'd actually make some gains in Minnesota and Virginia, in my opinion. I think he would probably do very well in Nevada and Arizona, and the whole thing would kind of hinge on Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. So I'd say if you have a Vivek run, I think Michigan would be really tough for Vivek to win, but I do think he'd be the favorite to win that presidential election, depending on who the nominees are. Now, if you have these kind of wild card candidates like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson run, a lot of non-college educated and some anti-establishment voters really would not like him as the nominee, but a lot of your normie type of voter would do very well with The Rock, or at least The Rock would do very well with that group. And so unfortunately for the GOP, if they do run The Rock and he does win a Democrat nomination, I actually could see Florida under 5. I know that sounds crazy, but I do think Florida could be under a 5-point win. I think more than likely if The Rock were to run against a generic, Republican, I could see this actually being the map, with North Carolina being a toss-up. Now, if JD were to run, that would be a really interesting election, because at that point, you'd kind of have this weird environment where you would have a close election in so many of the key states that it would essentially come down to a little bit of mix and match, and you may even see some weird trends. But I think that a JD versus Dwayne Johnson election would be very interesting to watch. I think that it would be rough, but I think JD probably wins the Rust Belt. And I think that the Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada would probably end up going to The Rock, and the whole race would probably actually be decided in North Carolina. I think JD would do especially well in the Rust Belt, just because The Rock probably wouldn't have any appeal in states like Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, or even some states up here. I just don't see him having the appeal in the Rust Belt like other Democrats would, but I think he'd appeal to a lot of voters in the Sun Belt. That I do think would be the case, and so I could see him winning Arizona, Nevada, Georgia by pretty decent margins, but North Carolina I think would actually be the true toss-up in a JD versus Dwayne Johnson race. That would be super duper interesting to see as a presidential election. But this is just sort of a speculative video just for fun, guys. If you guys did enjoy this video, make sure to go ahead and hit the like button and to subscribe. if you want more content just like this, and I will see you guys in the next video.